Have you ever heard of a sound that could supposedly heal your body right down to the cellular level? Well, today we are diving deep into the world of solfeggio frequencies. These are ancient tones that have made a massive comeback in the wellness world, and they promise everything from stress relief to, get this, spiritual awakening. So, what's the real story behind these so called miracle tones? Let's find out. And right at the heart of this whole phenomenon is one specific frequency with an absolutely extraordinary claim that a simple sound wave, just vibrating at 528 times a second, could potentially repair our very DMA. I mean, that's a huge claim, right? So let's see where it even comes from. To really get a handle on the whole solfeggio scale, we first need to zoom in on its most famous number, the 528 Hertz frequency. This is the one that drives all the headlines, and it's really central to the entire modern movement around these sounds. Okay, before we go any further, let's just get on the same page real quick. When we talk about Hertz, or HC, we're simply measuring vibrations. It's not magic, it's physics. So a sound at 528 Hertz is just a wave that's oscillating back and forth 528 times every single second. It's a physical, measurable thing. And boy, do people attribute some profound effects to this one vibration. It's often called the love frequency. It's said to bring on miracles. The claims really run the gamut, from reducing stress all the way to being literally woven into the mathematical fabric of creation itself. But the biggest claim, the one that turns the most heads, is for sure DNA repair. Now, as wild as all that might sound, these frequencies aren't something somebody just cooked up last week. They have a history that supposedly stretches back almost 1,000 years, and it's all tied up in sacred music. So the story goes, it all starts back in the 11th century with a Benedictine monk, Dido de Rezo, who used a particular hymn to teach singing. Then, these specific frequencies were apparently lost to time until the 1970s, when a physician named Dr. Joseph Puleo claimed he rediscovered them. Then that rediscovery is what really launched them into the modern wellness scene that we see everywhere today. And here it is. This is the original six-tone scale that was supposedly rediscovered. Each frequency gets a syllable from that old hymn and is assigned a very specific purpose. And you can see, focused right there in the middle, 528 Hertz, the me tone, the one designated for transformation and miracles. Okay, so we've got ancient history and we've got some pretty spectacular modern claims. That brings us to the most important question of all. Is there any actual hard scientific evidence to back any of this up? So let's start with the most fundamental question. Forget DNA repair for a second. Is it even possible for a sound wave, just a vibration moving through the air, to have any biological impact on our bodies at a cellular level? Well, the answer is yes, it's possible. And the principle behind it is called resonance. See, every single part of our body, from our organs down to our individual cells, is constantly vibrating. The core idea behind sound therapy is that if you introduce an external sound wave, it can influence these internal vibrations, maybe even nudging them back into a state of balance. And when it comes to 528 Hertz specifically, there is some intriguing preliminary data. This slide shows a 2017 lab study. What researchers did was they took human brain cells, they stressed them out with ethanol, and then they played a 528 Hertz sound wave for them. And the result? The cells that got the sound bath showed about a 20% higher survival rate. That's pretty interesting. And other small studies have pointed to some potential benefits too. Some found that just 5 minutes of listening to 528 Hertz music could reduce stress hormones and boost oxytocin, the love hormone. Animal studies saw a reduction in oxidative stress. But notice the T words here because they're really important: preliminary, small scale, and animal studies. These are not definitive proofs. And this brings us to the really critical part of this whole discussion. Because while those initial findings are definitely interesting, we have to look at them with a very healthy dose of skepticism, especially when the claims being made are so unbelievably grand. So let's just ask the big question head on. We'd seen a protective effect on some cells in a petri dish. Okay, but how strong is the evidence that 528 Hertz can actually perform miracles, like repairing DNA inside a living, breathing human being? And this slide just lays out the situation perfectly. On the left, that's the kind of research we have for solfeggio frequencies. Small studies, stuff done in lab dishes, some animal tests, not a lot of peer review. On the right, that's the gold standard for actual medical proof. We're talking large, double-blind, controlled trials on humans that other scientists can repeat and verify. And frankly, the evidence for solfeggio frequencies isn't even in the same league. There's also a pretty big logical problem here that's kind of hard to ignore. The unit Hertz is defined as cycles per second. But the second, that's a unit of time that we humans just made up. If we decided tomorrow that a second was just a little bit longer or shorter, that same physical vibration wouldn't be 528 anymore. So that kind of challenges the whole idea that the number 528 itself has some ancient cosmic power. So the bottom line is summed up really well right here. The evidence is still emerging. That's a very polite scientific way of saying it's not there yet. There's enough to spark some curiosity, for sure, but nowhere near enough to start making definitive medical claims. So, after looking at the mystical claims and the little bit of preliminary science, what's the fertile verdict? How should we really think about these frequencies? Let's be absolutely crystal clear on the single biggest claim. The number of large scale, peer reviewed human clinical trials that prove 528 Hertz can repair human DNA is exactly zero. There is currently no robust medical proof for this claim. Period. So here's how the whole story breaks down. The claims are extraordinary, no doubt. The very early science, it hints at some potential for things like stress reduction. But the gap between that and a proven medical miracle is just massive. So a key takeaway here is to see this as an interesting but totally unverified tool, not a miracle cure. And honestly, this is the most balanced and realistic way to look at it. Can listening to these tones help you relax? Absolutely. For some people, it might be an amazing tool for meditation or just managing stress. But does it cure disease or repair your DNA? That has simply not been proven. So, while the science absolutely does not support the miracle claims, this huge popularity of solfeggio frequencies brings up a really fascinating question. In our loud, chaotic, and often super stressful modern minds, maybe the search for a perfect tuning tone says less about the frequency itself and a whole lot more about our profound, there's human need to find just a little bit of honey. If you like our content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next videos.